for joining us on The Skeptic Psychic, where we delve into ancient societies, the ghosts, the paranormal, UFOs, all looking at it from the perspective of the true believer and from the skeptic perspective. Joining me, my partner, my co-host, my sibling, Kimber Rodriguez. Myself, I am Richard Gregg. And again, let's look into being the skeptic psychic.
Hello. Is it me you've been missing? Hi, everybody. Excuse me about us being slightly delayed, but we will promise we will, in fact, make it up to you. If you don't mind, my wonderful, smart, intelligent, thrifty, brave, clean, and very highly motivated sister of mine, Kimber Rodriguez, can tell you the details.
Yes, we are so sorry for the summer break, but we're ready to make it up to at least one lucky listener. And the way you can win is by emailing a code word to our researcher, Shauna at skepticpsychic.com. And that lucky phrase would be Southern Pacific.
Now, why did we choose Southern Pacific?
Southern Pacific is to honor our father, our grandfather, and our great grandfather who spent their lives running the rails. And
And,
to with that, you'll need to send in your shirt size and your
and your address.
address. Yes, so that we can send out a Skeptic Psychic t shirt to the lucky winner. You do not need to be listening to our live show in order to win. You just need to email that code word Southern Pacific to Shauna at skepticpsychic.com for a chance to win a Skeptic Psychic t shirt. With that, make sure you send your address. We know where to send it, and also your shirt size. And we will be emailing you to let you know if you win. Also, we will be sending out. I'm sorry, we will be announcing the winner on live on the podcast. The
Hate to interrupt, but we do want this by August 15th.
Yes, I was just going to say the deadline is August 15th, midnight. That's a Monday of this year. So good luck out there to all of y'all and happy listening.
Alrighty. And now, again, forgive us for being such a long time forgotten. We haven't forgotten you. It's just been some wonderful, hard things we had to take care of in order to bring you, the listener, back into our little world. And one of the things we are doing with this is we're going to actually do some merchandising. So, again, just to set up, probably the next podcast we do, we will be showing you the T-shirt.
Yes, and I will be adding our merchandising to our website here in the future. And I'll go ahead and post the link to that on our Facebook page and in our Facebook group. So if you want to have a little piece of Skeptic Psychic to show around town, you'll
Just a
have that
little piece.
available. You'll have that available. So as we said, tonight we will be talking about the railway system and hauntings along that system in honor of our father, our grandfather, and our great grandfather who all worked for the railroad. And Rick, why don't you go ahead and start us off tonight?
Alrighty, so the railway system is a relatively new thing in the history of the world. At the same time, it's one of the ancient ways of travel. The first rail system was created in Great Britain in the early 1560s with the creation of wooden ways. It wasn't until the 1800s, though the railways were, as we know it, were boomed into business for Europe. The first rail journey took place in South Wales on February 21st, 1804, with a steam-powered locomotive created by George Stephenson. From there, dozens of private companies started up, with a big railway boom hitting its stride in the 1840s as a national network.
Stephenson's works soon began shipping rails and engines to New England here in the US in the 1820s and 30s, with the first railroad running between Baltimore and Ohio. By 1850, we had an extensive railway network taking shape across the northeastern and midwestern sections, and with a smaller network growing in the south as it remained largely agricultural rather than industrial. People traveling from, say, New York to Savannah, Georgia, often traveled aboard charter boats sailing down the coast rather than by rail at that time.
The Transcontinental Railroad, built to connect the East Coast with California, took shape during and after the American Civil War, with its final section completed in May 10th, 1869, with a golden railway spike driven into the last railway section at Promontory Summit, Utah. Now, that's one of the places that our grandfather had one of his dream spots. On his bucket list was actually wanted to see.
I
That
never knew
spike,
that.
yes, that spike was simply ceremonial. However, the spike was provided as a contractor on the southern on the San Francisco end. Was disappointed to learn that no one was planning anything to commemorate, commemorate.
Commemorate.
Yes, its official uniting of the two great oceans of the world. David Hughes spent $400 of his own money to create that spike. Not to be outdone, other spikes were quickly made, including a second gold spike, which was conditioned by the proprietor of the San Francisco Newsletter, which is presumed to be lost in the Great San Francisco earthquake, a silver spike provided by the state of Nevada, and a gold and silver plated spike from the state of Arizona. The president of the San Francisco Pacific Express have a silver plated spike hammer created, and West Evans, who provided the railroad ties from the Central Railway section, has specifically made smooth and polished railway that tie made for the ceremony, made from California laurel wood and bearing a silver placard.
Of course, immediately after the ceremony, these were all removed and a real railroad tie and spike were immediately hammered into place.
So the question is, where are these relics?
That's a good question. The original golden spike was on display for a while in Utah before being returned to David Hughes. He later donated the spike to the museum at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. A tab of golden hanging on the spike was removed just before it had been struck into the ground. That tab was smelted into four rings, and a seven one long. I'm sorry, a seven. Let me.
1 inch long.
Yes, seven 1 inch long fobs in the shape of a spike and
I'm sorry,
gifted.
it's a foot long.
No, it's not.
Subway. No, it's 1 foot long watch fobs in the shape of a spike and gifted to various dignitaries who. Okay, sorry.
Yes, it would have to be an inch if it's for a watch because a
Okay.
foot long on a watch, yeah. So a foot long, sorry, inch long fob in the shape of a spike was gifted to various dignitaries who attended the ceremony and to some of David Hughes' relatives. One of those watch fobs, given to his nephew Tilden G. Abbott, is on display at the Golden Spike National Park. The fate of the others is not known. We just had
Oh,
a message from our researcher that it is 1 inch, not 1 foot. We
okay.
gotta love our metric system, people.
Yes. We have standard. We have the metrics over in Europe,
Yeah, well, standard
so
metric. I
it'd
like
be maybe
of.
about a few centimeters long.
Yes. The second spike's fates is also unknown. One sec. Sorry, I'm being interrupted. Go to the other room.
Oh.
Go to the other room. I'm doing my podcast. Please. Please. Thank you. Sorry for that interruption, folks. I am working on
Edited for
getting.
television.
I'm working on getting a private office so that I won't have these interruptions. So please forgive.
Mhm.
Um, the second spike's fate is unknown, and it is speculated that it was returned to the newspaper company and then lost in the Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906, when the heavily damaged building caught on fire and was completely destroyed. Rumor also states it may have been simply donated to one of the Union Pacific dignitaries and lost to time, though it's not likely as none of their memoirs mention the spike. So, really, no one knows where it went after the ceremony. But Arizona's silver and gold plated spike eventually made it to the collection of the Museum of the City of New York. Nevada's silver spike was donated to the Stanford University as well as the golden. And the silver plated hammer is also now in the possession of Stanford University. The rest, to the rest along with the golden spikes and its Nevada brother. Now, as for the polished California Laurelwood Railway tie, it went back to Sacramento and put on display until 1890. After that, it was transferred to the company's San Francisco office and also lost in the San Francisco earthquake.
So why do we share this? Well, for one thing, the missing from the ceremony were the Chinese workers who mostly built the darn thing. It's a shame the Chinese, who are rarely referred to by name and slept in tents rather than the train cars available to the other workers, hadn't been invited. It didn't matter that more than 11,000 Chinese workers were often put on more than dangerous tasks, such as blasting crews and clearing away the resulting debris as the railroad bored its way through the great mountains, that they were seen as merely as foreign labor, as such, paid less than their also foreign Irish counterparts. They were also fed for worse eating dry food and tea, supplemented with pork and chicken from animals kept on site. The Irish and American workers, however, ate beef and potatoes and drank both water and alcohol. Well,
Hmm. Well, chicken and pork's not that bad, but I mean, a good steak would have been,
would
you
have been
know,
nice.
yes. Well, they say anywhere there's a tunnel blast, you can hear the tales of ghosts of the workers who still haunt those shadowy passageways. Both the adventurous soul and those poor fools dragged along have only need to find enough courage to step within, and before long, the unseen eyes of the long since dead can be felt, watching as you trespass deeper and deeper into their domain. But any if long I'm sorry, but if any long dead railway workers do linger in those dark caverns, we hope that they at least have found a way to finally move on beyond segregation. After all, death is truly a great equalizer.
But we hardly recommend anyone entering into any type of railway tunnel unless it's definitely an abandoned line. Know that it's not condemned for dangerous conditions like possible cave ins, and the property owners allow access. Above all, no go alone. Again, never go alone. We aren't worried that you're about the ghouls and the ghosties getting to you, but Spelunking 101 insists you never go into any sort of cave without a companion.
True. And it's only been about 150 years since the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, and the riding the rails has become mostly a thing of the past. With each passing year, lines are closed down, leaving only their tracks behind, slowly being overtaken by the undergrowth. Railways, once the fastest way to transverse the continent, are becoming obsolete as people choose to fly or drive or even take a cruise, depending on their destination. Freight that once would have been hauled behind a smoking engine and leaving us sitting blocked at the railroad crossing for what seemed like hours are now trading coal engines for diesel trucks and the open road. There are some, however, for whom the rails will never stop calling to. The ghosts who once lived, or more appropriately died on, under or around these speeding behemoths of the past still linger. You can find them yourself if you only know where to look.
Take the Rio Grande Depot and the beautiful Salt Lake City of in middle of Utah. The last train through that depot was on May 29th, 1979. But that hasn't stopped the Purple Lady from still calling it home. Details may vary depending on who you speak to, but everyone in the agrees that the Purple Lady haunts the depot. She's said to be quite beautiful, dressed in a long, early 1900s gown. So you'd say it's early 20th century, and a large hat in dark purple. Though she always appears to be sad, it is said that she and her fiance got into an argument, and either she or her fiance, mind you, threw her engagement ring, which landed on the tracks. Distraught, the woman went down onto the tracks to find the ring and was hit by an inbound train, dying instantly on the tracks. Her spirit now lingers in the ladies' room as well as around many other similar locations within the depot.
I wonder if there's ever been any like maybe like if they've gone to do investigations there, if they've caught maybe any vision of her with video or camera or even disembodied voices. That would be
EVP
an
or something
interesting.
like that.
Yes, that would be nice to check out sometime. However, she's not alone. According to a former security guard, there is an invisible entity that walks on the mezzanine. At night, footsteps are heard above walking around the same time every night. But when he would rush up to confront the intruder, no one was present. Finally, deciding to hide on the mezzanine one evening, he heard the steps approach, but nothing was to be seen. However, something did brush up against him, and then the footsteps continued on, fading as they got further away from him.
I don't know. Perhaps the guilt of the fiance can't bring himself to be seen by the love he let go down on the tracks. But maybe he can also bear to be far from her. People have certainly done worse on the account of grief and regret.
Definitely. As for other haunted rail stations, Vancouver's British Columbia's waterfront station hosts a woman in 1920s garb who likes to dance by herself in a corner of the station. No one knows who she might be or why she likes it there, but she isn't alone. Elsewhere in the station, you can hear footsteps and soft voices, and the mischievous spirits have been known to play pranks with the night staff. One security guard entered a storage room that held old desks, and when he turned to head back out, he discovered the spooks had moved all of the desks that were behind him, and he was blocked in. Definitely not a trick we'd like to be played on us late at night. What do you think, bro?
No, no, no. Don't like that idea. Maybe because they're just mischievous.
Yes,
Not
I
saying
would pass.
poltergeist, I'm just saying mischievous.
Yes, I would pass on that.
Yeah. And what about the making lights in North Carolina? It said that just shortly after the Civil War, a man by the name of Joe Baldwin became a conductor on the Wilmington and Manchester line, which ran from Wilmington, North Carolina to Columbia, South Carolina, then down to Charleston. Joe loved working his train and would inspect the wheels, check to make sure that the freight cars were properly locked, and the drop of all the oil in all that signal lamps. He would check his passengers that everything that had been needed, and then would take his break in the caboose between stops. One stormy night, he was taking his break and relaxing when he realized the train was slowing down. And even though there was no stop at a section of the track, He jumped up and opened the door to the front of the caboose and realized there was no coach. Somehow, his caboose had become uncoupled and was rolling free while the rest of the train continued on its way up ahead. Frantic, as Joe knew the next train would come down the line, was moving faster than the freight train. Joe grabbed his lantern and stepped out on the back, peering into the rain and fog. Soon enough, a light loomed in the distance, announcing the approaching train. Frantically, Joe ran down the tracks, swinging his lantern back and forth to catch an engineer's eyes. The locomotive coming towards him threw the brake, and on the engine lurched in reverse, but was unable to stop before slamming into the man and caboose into his path. With his death, Joe had lost his grip on the lantern, and it sailed out into the swamp to burn throughout the night. It wasn't until the next day, when the light out, that the people were able to search the wreckage and found poor Joe's body. He had been decapitated, and despite all of his searching, his head wasn't able to be located. Ooh. Poor Joe was carried home, buried without his head. A few weeks passed. Decent weather. But one foggy night, the station master at the Marco spots a pinpoint of light coming down the tracks. Surprised that there shouldn't have been somebody there. He watched the light as it moved slowly down the track, for all appearances looking as if someone was walking down the rails. Well, carrying a lantern, mind you. The light began flicking back and forth, slowly at first, but as it grew closer to the station, it began swinging wilder and wilder. The light stopped and reversed back down the tracks until it disappeared into the darkness. The station master had no idea what to make of it, but let it slip from his mind when it didn't appear. That is, until the next foggy night, when the phenomenon repeated itself. Next foggy night, again, and once more. Engineers on the train approaching Marco would see along the tracks and stop, thinking it was a signaler. The railway had come to create a new rule for Marco area, stating that any signals would have to be done with two lights instead of one, so that any single light would have been ignored. People do come around to Marco for all over on foggy nights to see the Marco light for themselves. And scientists tried studying it, but it never formed a plausible theory. Some say ball lightning, swamp gas. Years later, people started insisting it must be an automotive headlight through the trees reflecting off the rails. In 1977, the railway shut down the line and physically removed the tracks. Once the tracks left, so did the light, and hasn't been spotted since. Some think that maybe poor Joe was able to find his head, or perhaps he was able to simply find some peace, now knowing that his job was done.
But this story is hardly the one of its kind. This story is hardly one of its kind. St. Louis, Saskatchewan, in Canada, actually commemorated their spooky store in 2014 on a highly sought after postage stamp. The stories say that eerie lights often dance along a stretch of tracks outside of town, a white light and a red light. Some believe the white light is the headlamp of a train, while the red light looks like the one used to flash from the back of the caboose. Believers say the lights are either from a ghost train that was once part of a deadly train robbery. Others say it's a ghost of a conductor who died in a horrible accident at that section of track when the train backed up and crushed him beneath its wheels. The debunkers say it's nothing more than auto headlights, and overeager imaginations. But the phenomenon has been occurring for generations and is now apparently still continuing to this day. One report of the St. Louis light dates back only a few years ago, where one man drove his friends out to see the light. Sure enough, it appeared, and they watched in fascination as it glowed before them. One strong, white, steady beam with a little red light beneath it, but drew no closer. Even though they sat staring for nearly 2 hours, eventually they decided to try and see where the light was coming from. So they drove directly at it along an old road that ran parallel to the tracks. They drove and drove until suddenly the light disappeared. Confused, they looked around only to discover the light was now behind them. Teller of this tale, St. Louis resident Sergei Garreau, says it scared the heck out of him as well as other members of the group. The town's mayor, Emile Lucier, runs a hotel nearby that he and his brother-in-law claim they've also seen the light. One night they decided that, as no one they knew had actually walked the tracks to look, that they would do so. They walked for about a mile along the old tracks without seeing anything. And then suddenly a bright light appeared right at the heels. The light was so bright that it cast shadows. When they turned around, however, it was gone. They told their experience to friends and relatives, and Emil's son and his friends wanted to see for themselves. So Emil went with them, but stayed standing next to the tracks as the boys hiked off. He said once they got into a distance, the ghost lights lit them up, highlighting them brightly, though upon their return, the boys stated that they had seen nothing themselves.
And now south of San Antonio, one story we always know. The most famous, the most highly debated is it an urban legend or is it true? We're talking about the ghost tracks on the south side of San Antonio. It is said that fatal accidents at the crossroads just past the San Juan Mission, which a school bus stalled on a rainy Texas morning in the 1930s, or was it the 40s? The fast approaching train applied the brakes and tugged frantically on the whistle, but was unable to stop in time. 10 children were reportedly killed and have continued to haunt the area to protect the others from the same fate. Now, it's a nun from the school who was so distraught that she drove to the site not long after and stopped her car at the very start point, not wanting to continue on. Now, according to her, she suddenly heard a sound of familiar children's voices, and suddenly her car was pushed forward, up, over the hem, and safely over the tracks into a. When the car finally stopped, she got out and rushed to the back to see whether she could have shoved the vehicle. In the dirt of her bumper was a bunch of little handprints.
We lost sound. We can't hear you.
In the dirt of her bumper were a bunch of little handprints. Apparently, this was a conviction of what she could do with the rest of her life, and she opened up an orphanage. It is said if you park your car over the tracks and shift into neutral, that the ghost of these said children will push your car uphill and off the tracks. Supposedly, people have seen children's fingerprints left smudged on the dirt of their cars. Some have even sprinkled a little bit of baby powder or cornstarch onto their bumpers beforehand, and then spotted the ghostly little fingerprints that are left behind. It is others have driven by and seen a little girl standing there, all alone, sometimes even holding a cute little teddy bear. They pull over to give her a ride home, only to have her fade from sight, and once again, when they reach their destination, her seatbelt still fastened, like she suddenly just slipped out from underneath the moment before. This ghost story has been featured on many TV shows, magazines, and newspapers. It is merely another gravity hill where there's seemingly level ground, but really enough of a slope to roll the car in neutral off the tracks. That wouldn't explain the fingertips or the voices and the laughter of the children of the site. We do suggest, however, that playing around on railway tracks is a dangerous thing to do, and the residents of this neighborhood are tired of those who want to play with fire. Local SAPDs will certainly send you on your way should you try to test one of this out for yourselves.
Also, I do want to point out that there is no history of this accident. There are no reports. So it is pretty much an urban legend and as you mentioned, it's just enough of a slope to make you go down. So it's an optical illusion that looks like it's going up when it's really going down. So it's not worth risking your life to try to get out there and check it out for yourself. However, I do want to point out that the trail ride has also ridden through there on their way to San Antonio for the stock show and rodeo. And whenever they get to this point, the horses get a little spooked and don't want to continue on. So, is there something there? Is there not? We'll never really know. We did have somebody just tell us that they love us. I'm not sure who it is. We want somebody on Facebook. Um,
So it
yes. So if you told us that you loved us, we love you too. And now I want to go ahead and tell a little story about my local area here in the Rio Grande Valley. There's a haunted 1928 Southern Pacific Railway station in Edinburgh, Texas. And this has been converted into the town's visitor information center. And it's known as one of Edinburgh's most haunted buildings. There were four Southern Pacific stations in the Texas region known as the Valley that were built. Oh, it's our wonderful niece, Flea.
Hello, Flea. We love you. Happy birthday to a wonderful, my favorite flea in the world.
Yes, we love you, Flea. And anyway, as I was saying, there were four Southern Pacific stations in Texas region known as the Valley, the Rio Grande Valley, actually. These were built in the Spanish colonial revival style in the late 1920s. Though the one in Harlingen has been demolished, which that's the one that Dad worked at. For those who know us well, our dad worked at the Harlingen one. Um, but the Edinburgh's terminal station was um, it has a railroad memorabilia exhibit and is on a semi-permanent loan from the Hidalgo County Historical Society. And I know I should be able to say that word since I lived there. Hidalgo. There we go. The Hidalgo County Historical Society, which is located just down the street. But it isn't
Not to be
anything.
confused with the horse named Hildago that they made a movie about.
No, not to be confused. Two completely different things. Um, but this has nothing to do with the museum that's doing the haunting. The president of the Chamber of Commerce says that there have been a number of strange occurrences at the railroad station. She also is the party who is responsibly part of it. The station, not the president. The president at the time was named Ada, and she had a touch activated music box in the station, and it has been known to go off when it hasn't been touched. Now, before you start thinking that this is merely a defective box rather than an object who has a spirit attached to it for whatever reason, there has also been sightings. People can be seen walking quickly and quietly past the reception desk. There's also sightings of an African American man over in what used to be the segregated side of the station. Voices with no known source can be heard, at times indistinct and muffled, and at other times as clear as day, and can be quite interrogative, meaning they're wanting to know who you are and what you're doing there, probably. How are you today, sir?
What do you think you're doing? Get over there.
However, most intriguing is the note. It is now supposedly in the hands of the Edinburgh police. The note demanded help in finding his body. The spirit supposedly wrote the note and claimed he was killed by two coworkers after he overheard their plans to hijack one of the trains. The note, most unghost-like, however, mentioned a deadline for his remains to be located. With all eternity before him, you'd think he'd have lost all sense of time. But maybe the deadline is just to be sure that there aren't any of his remains to identify, as bringing his killers to justice would certainly be unreasonable, given they themselves are probably now long since deceased as well.
Hmm. A little teaser for our next podcast in future time.
Future
Is
time! Future!
future
Future!
time
Future!
is basically we're going to do some ghost stories about the our founding presidents. Now, if you happen to live in the D.C. area on April 19th, 1865, you heard the melancholy whistle as Abraham Lincoln's funeral train departed on its way to travel throughout the 400 communities of America so they could pay tribute and say their sad farewells to the great emancipator. But hey, just because you weren't around then doesn't mean you can't still catch a glimpse of the great man's train. The ghost of the funeral train is said to retrace the route in every year on the anniversary of the inaugural trip. Some say if you happen to be out anywhere along the railroad it once traveled, you might just see the black steam engine with fire belching out from its smokestacks, gliding eerily down the tracks. Don't worry if you think you might be seeing just another steam reconstruction passion piece. The real deal allows you to see through the windows to see the president's coffin laid out and a vigilant group of Union soldiers keeping watch over the coffin. Be sure to let us know if you're a soldier. You see the ghost or skeleton, because both have been reported to be seen on the scene.
Another phantom train has been reported by famous author Philip K. Dick, who claims that when he lived in the town of Point Reyes Station, that he heard the phantom cry of a train while he was trying to sleep. Many others have also stepped forward to claim they have both seen and heard this ghost train. And the story goes that an angry engineer once drove his train through the night, wailing the train whistle to awaken the community as he strove to find the man who wronged his daughter. He must have never found the guy, as the train whistle can still be heard at night, keeping the townsfolk awake. Perhaps he should start looking somewhere away from the railway lines, as that doesn't appear to be working for him.
All right. Next, we have to go to the beautiful Catchburg County store on the outskirts of Durham, North Carolina. It lies an old set of tracks. Did a car go by, Kim, or is that just a weird noise?
That's probably my husband. He decided to come in and lay down.
All righty. Now, the story goes that the old tracks that still haunted today as a ghost train that still runs the rails. While that young man was walking along the tracks, taking one of those moonless nights, and was killed when the train failed to see or stopped in him in time. Every so often, on moonless night, you can still hear the whistle of a train and a rumble of the engines as it grows closer. A light would appear through the trees, though it eerily never draws closer. No matter how loud the noise grows, it just hangs there for some time before slowly fading away. Perhaps that can be explained by its conventionally scientific and logical means. But when you know about ghostly shadows that crosses the light, it is said the ghost of the man walking up and down the tracks, looking for his head by the light of the ghost train. And how do we know what he's doing? Locals say this pretty obviously, given that the ghostly form seems to be headless.
Apparently, North Carolina has its fair share of railway specters, as we found another spooky story that takes place within the Tar Heel state. Around the turn of the 19th century, conductor Jimmy Pierce was on a night run, chugging towards Early Station, and he saw a light that appeared on the tracks in front of him. He hit the brakes and braced for impact, even though he knew it was too late for him. And let's see, I'm sorry. Um, he knew it was too late to miss the oncoming train when suddenly it veered into the side of his and suddenly it veered to the side and passed within feet from the engine. Ever stranger that the fact that there is no parallel rail on this set of tracks is the fact that he swears the train heading past him, all lit up and seemed solid, was his own train. He realized how was going to sound, but decided that he needed to report the encounter once he reached the stop at Early. Sure enough, he teased and never finished filling out the report before hopping back on his rig to the next leg of his journey. Those who were teasing him must have fell silent when the news came a few hours later that Jimmy's train had jumped the track, killing him and severely injuring several others on board. As to why Jimmy saw his own ghost train before his death, some believe his ghost was trying to warn him off continuing forward. Since that fateful evening, however, Jimmy's phantom train has been seen time and time again racing toward the early station used to stand, only to fade just before arriving.
Oh, Union Station of Colorado has to have its share of spooky hauntings of place. One such specter is that of Down on the Luck's vagrant, who passed out on a bench outside the station after drinking himself into a stupor and not known if he had rolled over and onto the tracks, or if he woke up in a haze and stumbled onto them. But his lifeless body was found next to the tracks the next morning. He apparently had hung around for a station for years, spooking passengers loading and offloading. However, he seems to have vanished once after some recent renovations. There's a man who roams back and forth through the lobby, so confused about which train he should be taking before suddenly vanishing. Spectators state that he might be all the remains of a former passenger, long since gone, and who may pass while waiting for his train. There's also one uh, commandeering committing presence who appears to maintain guard over the Great Hall, though no one has any idea who he might be. Those in most sensitive, however, can feel his strong and calming presence as they pass through. Whoever it is, he is never seen, but people just feel reassured by his presence.
This next story, however, takes place not because of a railway accident, but rather plain old human fear. Near, near Malvern, Pennsylvania, there is a place known as Duffy's Cut. Since the 19th century, people have reported seeing man shaped orbs dancing among the trees, and a small valley of the tracks crossed through. Orbs that were said to be ghosts of the Irish railway workers that died of cholera. So many reports, in fact, that two anthropologists started digging in the area back in 2002, working part time on their breaks from teaching. However, it wasn't until 2009 that the first few bones were found: two skulls, six teeth, and 80 odd various bones. In 2012, they eventually found a grave containing various remains of five men and one woman. It wasn't a mass grave that they suspected, but it was a start. The remains of a sixth man were located not long after, and it appeared as if the Irish crew working in the 1870s may have accidentally dug up seven victims when taking dirt from the valley to build up new embankments. Those poor diggers in the 1870s had nothing to do with the original massacre, which had happened 40 years earlier. All they knew was that the talk was they were cholera victims. And so the crew took the bones and coffin fragments that they had found and dug a new grave for them in another location. The bones were taken to the University of Pennsylvania, and it was discovered that not only had the poor souls not died of cholera, but they were shot and bludgeoned with axes before being nailed into their coffins. One coffin that was pieced back together had over 100 nails to keep it shut. Cholera had everyone fearing it, as it was highly contagious. And along with the remains and bits of coffins, there were multiple artifacts discovered at the gravesite. These included wood pipes with carved clay bowls, shoe buckles, buttons, utensils, an Irish harp, and shards of dishware that were uncovered from the area and displayed at the university. It was then that the ghostly activity in the building was being reported by the staff. Sightings of ghostly men formed in blues and greens appeared and faded. Eventually, a mass grave with the remaining dead were found and off to the west via sonar. While it is possible that there may have been a cholera outbreak in the camp, it should be remembered that all workers were deemed free of disease at the time they stepped upon American soil back in June of 1832, and all were hired directly off the dock and sent immediately to the work site. Also, according to the bones that were excavated, disease definitely did not kill them. These 57 men and two women were shot in the head and clubbed with axes. A horribly executed massacre that the foreman, Philip Duffy, also an Irishman, covered up and zealously guarded until his death in 1871. In fact, Duffy's family was so afraid of vandalism and desecration over what he had done that they kept his final resting place a secret without a tombstone. It wasn't until 2018 that a grave marker for him was donated and placed in the local cemetery. At the time of the massacre, however, cholera was highly feared. The theory is that the first seven victims may have actually been ill, perhaps contracting cholera from the dirty stream they drank from, and they were killed to stop the spread from the disease. The fact that they were buried originally in rough coffins show it's likely that these 7 were buried by their fellow Irishmen. As for the rest, who can say? Amtrak, who owns the land, has refused to allow the remaining victims to be disinterred, as they claim that it lies too close to the track lines and that digging would be too dangerous. Or perhaps it's because they simply do not want more publicity, or because they fear it could mean a shutdown of the line that they still use daily. So if you find yourself traveling the tracks about 30 miles west of Philadelphia and find yourself crossing through Duffy's Cut, be sure to say a prayer for those poor souls. The only evidence you'll see is a small enclosure of rocks without a signpost or marker. Isn't it odd the things you pass every single day without knowing what just lies beneath the surface?
Now, going on to our William Shatner final chilling tale. Kidding. Tale of Woe comes with a bit of a warning, a very serious one, that we have entertained you with unconfirmed stories of speculative accidents and shared a real horror story that should never have been. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, we have a ghost cat that's been haunting this little area for a while.
Oh, babe.
One sec.
There. Now, we know that the lonely rails sing to some of us to come and see for ourselves whatever scares that may linger in our realm of life. But the tracks are a dangerous place to be, even those that are no longer in use. Those that still are in the services, however, are a deadly place to play. So, please, think about before going out on a ghost hunt. As such, we're going to leave you with a sad and completely preventable warning. On August 27th, 1891, a passenger train jumped the tracks as it crossed in the Bostonian Bridge and outskirts of Statesville, North Carolina. The train, steam locomotive number 166, was pulling a train number 9 onto the Richmond and Danville Railroad line, with a baggage car and a car for first and second class passengers, a sleeper car, and the railway superintendent private car. It was running just over a half an hour late and was speeding to make it on time. Not 5 minutes out of the station, the train derailed and hit the ground at over 150 feet below. Those who were less injured managed to climb up out of the slope and ran across the bridge back to the station to report the disaster, with rescuers taking all those injured into local homes, as there was no hospital. In all, 23 people died. The inquest concluded that someone had gone out of the bridge and pulled the spike from the rail, causing it to crash, but the area was already suspected of being neglected. Legend sprang up upon the first anniversary of the accident that a screeching of wheels and screams of passengers were heard, and that the ghost of the uniformed railroad employee with a gold watch was seen out of the sight. Supposedly the spirit of the baggage master, U. Unster, whose body was found in the wreckage with a broken neck. A woman claimed that see the ghostly indent of a 50th anniversary of the wreck incident. So maybe not the indent, but the incident of the track on the 100th anniversary. Over 100 people showed up to try and spot the wreck, with vendors nearby trying to hawk shirts and other morbid memorabilia. Back in 2010, on the 119th anniversary of the incident, a group of nearly a dozen amateur ghost hunters walked 150 feet out onto the bridge just before 3 a.m. to see it themselves. Instead of the ghost train, a real train showed up instead. By the time the hunters realized their mistake and tried to get out for safety, it was already too late, and two of them, one seriously injured as she fell from the bridge, the other one hit by the train and was instantly killed.
This is just one of several cautionary tales we could have shared with you, as more than one thrill seeker has been struck and killed, all for the curiosity and not thinking clearly. While we do encourage you to follow your own path to see for yourself just what is out there, we do ask that you do it responsibly. Do not cross onto the tracks, which is considered trespassing, even on abandoned tracks. Should you decide to follow the tracks in your searches, travel off to the side, as far off as you can manage, as the train generates a lot of wind and kicks up any rocks and debris that may litter the tracks. Always take a form of light with you at night if you are in a rural setting. Also, be mindful of wild animals that may be roaming nearby. Predators are often drawn to the tracks as they spot as they are spots to reliably find dead animals crushed by the railway. Do not try to distract, jump out, at, or otherwise try to spook the engineers, as it is not funny and can cause harm. And above all, never get too close to the tracks, hoping they will be able to stop in time. Trust us when they say, no ghost hunt or joke is worth your life or that of others.
Next week, we're heading to West Virginia to actually look at one of the most famous, or I should say, not as famous, but mostly most famous cryptids out there, and again the tragic ending to this story. We're going to be looking for the Mothman.
Yes, is he a cryptid? Is he an alien? Is he a ghost or a demon? We shall find out next week.
Yes, and
And
to just
again, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and again, we are still having that contest, and again, if you want to enter that contest, please send an email over to Shauna at skepticpsychic.com. Shauna at skepticpsychic.com. And the secret code word we want you to use in order to enter in it, Southern Pacific.
Yes, make sure you email that over to Shauna at skepticpsychic.com. I do have it up here on the screen for you all to see. And if go ahead and include your address and the size of shirt you want if you do win. This contest again is going until August 15th, midnight, which is a Monday. We will announce the winner on the Facebook page as well as in our podcast. And you also will get an email letting you know if you won. Um, we forgot to mention at the beginning of the show how you can get a shout out from us. And that's by giving us a review on Apple Podcast. Yes, 5 stars is what we
Five
like.
stars. We like it to 5 stars. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, seis. Un, deux, trois, quatre, cinq.
Yes, but we will take whatever you give us. Also, if you leave a rating, leave us a review. We do read those on the air. And you can find us on Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitch. Also, you can find recordings of us on Apple Podcast and anywhere podcasts can be found.
Spotify.
We do upload the audios a couple of weeks after. I am a little behind since we took some time off, so I am a little behind on episodes, but I'll be working on getting those up. Um, I'm going to get back to posting this week, so look out for a new audio from one of our previous episodes coming up this week as well. And anything else you'd like to add before we close out tonight?
Yes, I'd like to say to all of our friends, fans, and people that know me very well, unpleasant nightmares.
Sweet dreams, everybody. We love you and good night.
Good night.